The neon-lit streets of Varchara Prime buzzed with life. Tall, sleek towers loomed overhead, their exteriors a chaotic blend of holographic advertisements in a dozen alien languages. It was the largest trading hub in this quadrant of the galaxy, a place where every species, no matter how strange or hostile, could find sanctuary and commerce. Yet, amidst the vibrant tapestry of alien life, one figure drew every eye and every whisper. Elias, the last known human. He moved through the marketplace with a steady, unyielding stride, his presence commanding an odd mixture of curiosity and unease. Towering Yulrock merchants, their armored bodies bristling with spikes, gave him a wide berth. Delicate Lethian dancers, draped in silken robes that shimmered with bioluminescence, paused mid-performance to watch him pass. Even the hardened Thalak, known for their fierce warrior culture, glanced his way, exchanging murmurs that were half admiration, half contempt. Human, outcast, unbreakable. The words floated through the crowd like smoke. Elias could feel their weight pressing down on him, a constant reminder of what he was, and what he would never be again. There were no more humans left, at least, none that anyone knew of. Earth was a memory turned to ash, its ruins scattered across the stars after the Kreath incursion. And so, the galaxy had designated him with a title that was both a warning and a badge of honor: the last human. His eyes, cold and piercing, swept over the crowd. He noted every exit, every potential threat, instincts honed from years of battle and survival. The humans had once been a thriving race, scattered across dozens of worlds. Now they were a ghost story, a cautionary tale told to alien younglings: be good, or the humans will come for you. Elias snorted at the thought. Fear of humans still lingered, even when there were none left to fear, none but him. As he rounded a corner, the marketplace opened up into a sprawling courtyard, the center dominated by a massive holographic display. A councilman of the Supreme Assembly was delivering a speech, his insectoid features twitching with agitation. And so, with the latest incursion from the Kreath, it is imperative that we increase border security along the outer rim. Too many lives have been lost due to reckless. Elias tuned out the rest. Kree. The word sent a ripple of suppressed rage through his chest. The Kreath were more than just another hostile species. They were the ones who had wiped out humanity, and they were back, as always, invading, conquering, and leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Can you believe it? A voice murmured beside him. Elias shifted, glancing down at a small, hunched figure cloaked in rags. An Anari trader, its multi-eyed gaze fixed on the display. Those Kreath monsters are back again, the alien muttered, its voice trembling with barely concealed fear. No one's willing to take on their mercenary contracts anymore. Even the Thalak are refusing. It's suicide. Not everyone, Elias replied softly. The Anari blinked up at him, its eyes widening. What? You? Elias gave a single, curt nod. The Anari's mandibles clicked nervously. You're insane. There's no one left to— Someone has to do it, Elias interrupted, his voice low but firm. If we let the Kreath keep pushing into the outer rim, they'll reach Varchara Prime within the year. Then no one will be safe. But what can one human do? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, striding purposefully toward a massive structure on the far side of the courtyard. The Mercenary Guild headquarters loomed ahead, its stone facade carved with symbols of 100 different warrior clans. It was here that the galaxy's most dangerous jobs were posted, the jobs no one else would take, jobs that required the kind of skills and sheer tenacity only a human possessed. As he pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside, a wall of silence fell over the room. Eyes turned, antennae twitched, and spines bristled. The guild hall was filled with battle-hardened aliens of every shape and size, their weapons gleaming in the low light. But when they saw Elias, the tension in the air thickened. Human! Someone spat from across the room. Thought you were dead, growled another, a hulking beast with 4 arms and a face like a reptilian nightmare. Not yet, Elias replied coolly. He walked up to the main console, ignoring the hostile stares. His fingers, calloused and scarred, tapped in his identification. A digital interface flared to life, displaying a list of active contracts. Dozens of missions flashed by. Escort duties, reconnaissance, low-risk retrievals. Elias scrolled past them all until he found what he was looking for. Mission: Kreath incursion. Sabotage operation location: Fringe Planet, C847. Objective: infiltrate Kreath-occupied territory and destroy their war engines. High risk of death. The payout was astronomical. No sane mercenary would take this job. Elias's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. No sane alien, that is. He hit the acceptance button. The console chimed, locking in his contract. A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. You're really going through with it? A voice demanded. Elias turned to see a Thalak warrior approaching, his exoskeletal frame shimmering in the dim light. General Raka, one of the Thalak's most feared commanders, and the closest thing Elias had to a father figure. You're still alive because you know when to walk away, Elias. Don't throw it away for a suicide mission. This isn't suicide, Elias replied evenly. It's vengeance. Raka's eyes narrowed. Vengeance won't bring your people back. No, Elias agreed, but it'll make sure no one else ends up like them. For a long moment, the two warriors stared at each other. Then Raka sighed, shaking his head. Fine, just don't expect anyone to come looking if you don't make it back. Elias shrugged. Never do. With that, he turned and walked out, feeling the weight of every stare burning into his back. A human, taking on a mission no one else would touch. A human, willingly throwing himself into the jaws of death. Reckless. Raka muttered. Yes. Elias murmured under his breath, a steely resolve settling in his chest. But that's what makes us human. The steady hum of the transport vessel reverberated through the cramped cockpit as Elias strapped himself into the pilot's seat. The lights were dim, casting shadows across the worn metal panels. His ship, the Vanguard, was a relic, one of the few remaining human-built crafts still flying. It was smaller than the average alien fighter, but it packed more speed and firepower than most believed. Elias preferred it that way. Underestimation was his greatest weapon. Approaching target planet, C-847, the ship's AI announced in a clipped, metallic tone. Krayath activity detected. Heavy patrols in the lower atmosphere. Elias nodded absently, his eyes locked on the viewport. The war-torn planet loomed ahead, a dark orb of swirling clouds and jagged mountain ranges. Its surface was scarred from years of conflict, pockmarked with craters and the skeletal remains of once thriving cities. This place had been a thriving colony world, a hub of trade and commerce for dozens of species. Now, it was little more than a battlefield, another casualty of the Krayath's relentless expansion. Begin descent, Elias ordered. The ship shuddered as it punched through the planet's atmosphere, flames licking at its hull. Elias's hands moved instinctively over the controls, guiding the craft into a steep dive. Below, he could see flashes of laser fire, the distant explosions of artillery shells. Krayath war machines, massive constructs of metal and organic matter, crawled across the landscape like titanic insects, their limbs bristling with weaponry. Enemy anti-air defenses active, the AI warned. Divert power to thrusters. We'll go in low, Elias replied calmly. The Vanguard dipped lower, skimming just above the jagged terrain. The view through the cockpit was a blur of motion, towering spires of rock and deep chasms, all illuminated by the eerie glow of Krayath machinery. Elias felt his pulse quicken, a familiar adrenaline surge coursing through his veins. This was the part he lived for. The split-second decisions, the razor's edge between life and death. Entering designated drop zone in 10 seconds. Elias took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the eject lever. The plan was simple enough. Land undetected, infiltrate the Krayath camp, and destroy their war engines. Simple, except for the fact that no one else had ever come back alive from one of these missions. But he wasn't no one else. The ship's AI counted down soft 3, 2, 1. Elias yanked the lever. The cockpit canopy blew open with a deafening roar, and he was ejected into the night sky, the wind tearing at his armor. For a split second, the world spun in a dizzying blur. Stars, clouds, and the dim outlines of the Krayath machines below. Then, his thrusters activated, stabilizing his descent. He landed hard, his boots crunching into the rocky ground. Instantly, he rolled to his feet, crouching low behind a crumbling outcropping. The Vanguard continued its descent, a decoy on autopilot, drawing Krayath fire away from his landing site. Elias scanned his surroundings, eyes narrowed. The Krayath camp sprawled across the valley floor, a maze of prefabricated structures and towering war engines. Dozens of Krayath soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their forms hulking and insectoid, each one armed to the teeth. A flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, muscles tensing, only to relax a fraction of a second later. It was just a scout. The creature was smaller than the average Krayath warrior, its carapace lighter, and its limbs more slender. It moved with a skittish, almost nervous energy, its antennae twitching as it scanned the area. Elias hesitated, considering. Scouts usually operated alone, gathering intelligence for larger assault groups. This one didn't seem to have noticed him yet. He could kill it easily. One shot, and the threat would be neutralized. But something stopped him. A gut instinct, honed over years of battle, warning him that there was more to this situation than met the eye. Instead, he crept closer, staying low. The scout was muttering softly to itself in the Krayath tongue, its voice high-pitched and rapid. Elias's translator implant crackled to life, converting the alien words into a tinny, mechanical voice. Can't believe they sent me out here alone. Stupid command. Just a deserter. Not even supposed to be here. Deserter. Elias's eyes narrowed. That changed things. He adjusted his stance, stepping deliberately on a loose rock. The scout's head snapped up, its compound eyes widening in alarm. Who? Elias moved swiftly, his hand flashing out to clamp around the creature's throat. The scout struggled, limbs flailing, but Elias held firm, his grip unbreakable. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm not here to kill you, unless you make me." The scout froze, its breath rasping through its mandibles. Up close, it looked even more fragile, barely more than a juvenile by Krath standards. Its carapace was dull, scarred in places, and one of its antennae was bent at an awkward angle. What do you want?" it croaked. "Information," Elias replied flatly. "Why are you here? What's the Krath's plan?" The scout hesitated, its eyes darting back and forth. Elias tightened his grip, just enough to remind the creature who was in control. "Talk, or I leave you for the Thalak to find." At the mention of the Thalak, the scout stiffened, its fear palpable. "No, please, I'll talk," it babbled. "They sent me to monitor the camp's defenses. They're planning to launch a full-scale assault on the outer rim. Massive fleet, thousands of war engines. But it's just a diversion." Elias's eyes narrowed. "A diversion for what?" "They're building something," the scout whispered. "Something big. A weapon. It's hidden deep in the main command center. Only the high-ranking officers know about it. They call it the Endbringer." The word sent a chill down Elias's spine. He'd heard whispers of Krath superweapons before, but this sounded different. "What does it do?" he demanded. The scout shook its head frantically. "I don't know, I swear, but they're terrified of it. Terrified of losing control. It's supposed to be their ultimate weapon. If they finish it, the war's over. No one will be able to stop them." Elias released the scout, his mind racing. The mission had just changed. Destroying the war engines was still a priority, but if there was a weapon of this magnitude in play, he had to get to that command center. "Where's the entrance?" he asked sharply. "Show me." The scout hesitated, glancing toward the camp. Then, slowly, it pointed with a trembling limb. "There, near the central tower. But you'll never make it through the defenses alone." Elias smiled grimly. "Watch me." He turned away, but the scout's voice stopped him. "Wait!" it called, desperation lacing its tone. "Take me with you. If I stay here, they'll kill me for talking to you. I have nowhere else to go." Elias paused, considering. Taking a Krath with him was risky, to say the least. But the creature was right. If it stayed, it was dead, and Elias could use every advantage he could get. "Fine," he said finally, "but you keep up, or I'll leave you behind." The scout nodded rapidly, relief flooding its features. "I will, I promise." Elias nodded curtly. "Then let's move." They slipped into the shadows, moving swiftly and silently toward the heart of the Krath camp. Elias's mind was focused, his senses alert. This mission was more than just a chance for vengeance. If what the scout said was true, it could be the key to something far greater, and Elias had no intention of letting the Krath keep that key. The Krath camp was a fortress, a sprawling maze of bunkers and command centers ringed by towering war engines. Guards patrolled every perimeter, their insectoid forms illuminated by the crimson glow of the camp's security lights. The air was thick with tension, and every sound, a distant clang of metal, the buzz of electronic sensors, seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. Elias and his unlikely companion, the Krath deserter, moved silently through the shadows, slipping between patrol routes and ducking beneath security cameras. The scout, who had introduced himself as Vesk, seemed jittery, his antennae twitching with every step, but he knew the camp's layout better than Elias could have hoped, leading him through hidden paths and supply tunnels that bypassed the main checkpoints. They paused behind a stack of supply crates, the scent of acrid fuel stinging Elias's nostrils. He glanced over at Vesk, who was scanning the area with wide, anxious eyes. "You sure this is the right way?" Elias murmured, keeping his voice low. Yes, I'm sure," Vesk whispered back, his voice trembling. "The command center's just ahead, past that guard post." Elias peered around the corner. The command center loomed in the distance, a massive armored structure bristling with turrets and antennae. A squad of Krath soldiers stood at the entrance, their weapons held loosely but alert, too many to take head-on. "We need a distraction," Elias muttered. Vesk's mandibles clicked nervously. I can create a disturbance," he offered, hesitating. Maybe trigger a false alarm in the supply depot. That'll draw them away." Elias raised an eyebrow. It was a bold move, especially for a deserter whose only motivation for helping was self-preservation, but he didn't have time to question it. "Do it," he ordered. Vesk nodded quickly and scuttled off, moving with surprising speed and agility. Elias watched him go, his gaze thoughtful. The scout was a strange one, afraid, yes, but there was a spark of something else there too, something Elias hadn't expected to find in a Krath: determination. Moments later, a shrill alarm pierced the night. Lights flashed across the camp and the guards at the command center snapped to attention. "Alert! Fire in Sector 6! A voice blared over the intercom. "All units, respond!" The guards exchanged hurried looks, then sprinted off toward the source of the disturbance. Elias waited until they were out of sight, before slipping out of cover and darting across the open ground. The entrance was unguarded now, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. He reached the main door and tapped a series of commands into his wrist console. The holographic display flickered, lines of code scrolling rapidly as he hacked into the camp's security net. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, the seconds ticking by with agonizing slowness. Finally, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Elias slipped inside, the interior of the command center a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The walls were lined with control panels and holographic displays, alien symbols flashing in rapid succession. The air was cool and sterile, humming with the quiet murmur of machinery. Vesk appeared beside him a moment later, panting slightly. "They took the bait," the scout whispered, a hint of pride in his voice. "But it won't last long. We need to move." Elias nodded, scanning the room. The Kreath command center was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each one heavily guarded. Somewhere in this complex was the weapon Vesk had spoken of, the Endbringer. "Lead the way," Elias said curtly. Vesk hesitated, then pointed to a narrow maintenance shaft tucked away in the corner. "That passage leads to the lower levels," he explained. "We'll be able to bypass most of the guards and reach the central chamber undetected." They moved quickly, slipping through the narrow shaft and descending into the bowels of the complex. The walls grew darker, the air heavy with the scent of oil and metal. Elias could feel the tension building, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. Every instinct screamed that they were walking into a trap, but he pushed the thought aside. He didn't have a choice. He had to see this through. The maintenance shaft opened into a cavernous chamber, dimly lit and filled with the low hum of machinery. Elias crouched behind a metal pillar, scanning the area. The chamber was massive, dominated by a towering structure in the center, a dark, angular machine bristling with cables and energy conduits. Its surface pulsed with a sickly green light, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Even from this distance, Elias could feel the sheer power radiating from it, a malevolent energy that made his skin crawl. "That's it," Vesk whispered, his voice barely audible. "The Endbringer." Elias's jaw tightened. The weapon was far larger than he'd anticipated, easily the size of a small starship. Whatever it was designed to do, it wasn't just a conventional bomb. This was something far more dangerous. "What's its purpose?" he demanded, keeping his gaze locked on the machine. I told you I don't know," Vesk stammered. But the officers said it could destroy entire systems in one strike, turn stars into black holes. If they activate it," he didn't need to finish the sentence. "If the Kreath unleashed this weapon, it wouldn't just end the war. It would end everything." Elias's mind raced. Destroying the machine was the only option, but he couldn't just blow it up. If Vesk was right, setting off a chain reaction could trigger the very catastrophe they were trying to prevent. "Then we disable it," he muttered. "Shut it down from the inside." He turned to Vesk, his expression grim. "Can you access the main controls?" The scout hesitated, then nodded shakily. Yes, but it's heavily encrypted. It'll take time." "Do it. I'll cover you." Vesk swallowed hard but didn't argue. He scuttled over to a nearby terminal, his fingers flying across the console. Elias positioned himself behind a stack of machinery, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. Minutes passed, each one stretching into an eternity. Vesk worked furiously, lines of code flickering across the display. Elias's gaze never wavered, his senses alert for the slightest sound. Then, a soft click. I'm in," Vesk whispered, his voice filled with a mix of triumph and terror. "I can shut down the power core, but—" He broke off, his eyes widening in horror. "What is it?" Elias demanded. They know we're here," Vesk gasped. "They've locked me out of the system. A deafening alarm blared through the chamber. Red lights flashed, and a dozen Kreath soldiers poured into the room, their weapons raised. "Get down!" Elias roared, diving behind the terminal as laser fire erupted around them. Vesk screamed, curling into a ball as the soldiers advanced, their eyes blazing with fury. Elias gritted his teeth, his hands moving with practiced speed as he drew his weapons, a pair of compact plasma blades. The soldiers hesitated, momentarily taken aback by the sight of the human standing defiantly in their path. "Kill him!" one of them snarled. They charged, their movements a blur of claws and carapace. But Elias was faster. He leapt forward, the plasma blades cutting through the air in a deadly arc. The first soldier went down with a gurgled scream, his chest split open in a shower of sparks. The second lunged at him, mandibles snapping, but Elias twisted aside, driving his blade into the creature's neck. More soldiers rushed in, surrounding him. Elias moved like a whirlwind, every strike precise and lethal. The chamber was filled with the hiss of plasma and the crackle of energy shields as he fought, his muscles straining with the effort, but there were too many. "Vesk!" he shouted, his voice strained. "Shut it down now!" The crimson glare of the alarm lights bathed the chamber in a hellish glow as Elias fought on, every muscle screaming with exertion. The Kreath soldiers were relentless, swarming him in waves. He ducked under a clawed swipe, his plasma blades flashing in a deadly arc that severed an attacker's limb. Sparks flew, and the alien let out a shriek of pain, crumpling to the ground. But they just kept coming. "Vesk!" Elias shouted again, his voice strained. Now! The scout's fingers flew across the terminal, his mandibles clenching in concentration. Sweat beaded on his scarred carapace as he worked, his eyes darting frantically over the lines of alien script. The Krath were trying to lock him out of the system, but he was fast, faster than they had anticipated. I'm almost there, Vesk cried, his voice high-pitched with fear. Just a little more. Elias twisted, driving his blade through the chest of another soldier. The creature convulsed, then collapsed, its weapon clattering to the floor. The human turned, breathing hard as he faced the remaining enemies. His armor was scorched, and his muscles ached, but he stood tall, eyes blazing with determination. Get back! One of the Krath soldiers snarled, raising its rifle. Before it could fire, the chamber shuddered violently. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, and the lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. The Krath soldiers froze, their expressions shifting from rage to confusion. What's happening? One of them hissed. Elias didn't wait for them to figure it out. He lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air in a blur of motion. The Krath reeled back, caught off guard by his sudden ferocity. One by one they fell, their bodies crumpling to the floor in heaps of shattered carapace and smoking wounds. And then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the fighting was over. Elias stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving. The last of the Krath soldiers lay at his feet, its lifeless eyes staring up at him in silent disbelief. It's done, Vesk gasped, his voice trembling with exhaustion. I did it. The scout's terminal emitted a soft chime, and the hum of the massive machine in the center of the chamber began to subside. The green glow that had pulsed ominously from its surface flickered, then dimmed, leaving the room in shadow. Elias turned, his gaze fixed on the Endbringer. It loomed over them, dark and silent now, its power core deactivated. You shut it down? He asked quietly. Vesk nodded shakily. Yes, the power core is offline. It can't activate. Relief washed over Elias, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was just one weapon. If the Krath had built this, they could build more, and if they were desperate enough to deploy something of this scale, they have to be hiding something else, he muttered. There's no way they'd risk using a weapon like this, unless they had a backup plan. Vesk's eyes widened. A backup plan? Elias strode over to the terminal, his mind racing. He tapped a series of commands into the console, bringing up a series of schematics and encrypted files. We need to find out what else they're working on, he said grimly. If they're building more weapons, we have to know where. Otherwise, shutting this down won't make a difference. But I already, Vesk began, but Elias silenced him with a sharp look. You want to survive? He snapped. Then help me. Vesk swallowed hard, then nodded, his hands trembling as he accessed the system's main database. The screen flickered, lines of code scrolling rapidly as the scout sifted through layer after layer of security. Finally, he paused, his eyes widening in shock. Wait, he whispered. I think I found something. Elias leaned in, his gaze fixed on the display. A single file was highlighted in red, marked with the Kreeth symbol for classified. What is it? He demanded. Vesk hesitated, then opened the file. A series of schematics and detailed notes filled the screen, along with a map of the galaxy. Elias's eyes narrowed as he scanned the information, his blood running cold. It's not just this weapon, Vesk murmured, his voice shaking. They're building a fleet, hundreds of warships, all equipped with miniature versions of the Endbringer's core. Elias's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a superweapon, it was a doomsday plan. They're planning to deploy these across the entire galaxy, he muttered, his hands clenching into fists. If they succeed, they'll have the power to destroy entire star systems. No one will be able to stop them. But why? Vesk stammered. Why would they do this? It's not just about winning the war, Elias interrupted, his voice grim. It's about control. The Krath want to make sure no one ever opposes them again. He turned to Vesk, his eyes burning with a fierce, unyielding resolve. We have to stop this. All of it. But how? Vesk whispered. There's no way we can fight an entire fleet. We're not going to fight them. Elias cut in. We're going to sabotage them. Vesk stared at him, his expression torn between disbelief and a glimmer of hope. You mean, destroy their fleet? Elias nodded slowly. Yes, we find their main shipyard, and we blow it to hell. If we take out their production facilities, they won't be able to build any more of these weapons. But that's insane, Vesk protested. The shipyard will be heavily guarded. We'll never get close enough to... We'll find a way, Elias said firmly. We have to. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the reality of the situation sinking in. The Krath were planning something far worse than anyone had imagined, and if they didn't act now, it would be too late. Okay, Vesk whispered finally. Okay, I'm in. But where do we start? Elias's gaze shifted back to the screen. The map displayed a series of coordinates, each one corresponding to a different Krath installation. But one, in particular, stood out, a massive structure on the outskirts of the galaxy, marked with the highest level of security clearance. There, he said, pointing to the location. That's their main shipyard. If we hit them there, We can cripple their entire operation. Vesk's eyes widened. That's suicide. Maybe, Elias agreed quietly. But if we don't do this, they'll wipe out everything. The scout hesitated, then nodded slowly. Then we do it, he said softly. We stop together. Elias allowed himself a small smile. It was a dangerous, reckless plan, but it was the only chance they had. Let's move, he said, turning away from the console. We need to get off this planet before they realize what we've done. They slipped back into the shadows, leaving the darkened chamber behind. The Kreath were relentless, powerful, and ruthless, but they hadn't counted on a human's determination or his willingness to go to any lengths to protect the galaxy. The Vanguard streaked through the dark void of space, its engines blazing like twin stars as it hurtled toward the Kreath shipyard. The sprawling structure loomed ahead, a massive complex suspended in the blackness of space, its silhouette bristling with weapon platforms and defense turrets. Hundreds of warships floated in the surrounding docking bays, their hulls glinting menacingly in the starlight. Elias's jaw tightened as he studied the massive fleet. It was even larger than Vesk had described, an armada capable of wiping out entire civilizations. And if they succeeded in launching, there would be no stopping the Kreath from subjugating every species in the galaxy. We're coming up on the outer defense perimeter, Vesk reported nervously from the co-pilot's seat. The scout's claws tapped rapidly on the console, his mandibles twitching with tension. The turrets are locking onto us. Divert all power to shields, Elias ordered. We're going in. The Vanguard plunged forward, its hull shaking violently as a barrage of plasma fire erupted from the shipyard's defense grid. Blinding bolts of energy streaked past them, narrowly missing the small craft as Elias weaved through the hail of fire. Alarms blared, and the ship's AI issued a series of increasingly urgent warnings. Shields at 40%, 30%. Hold steady, Elias growled, his hands steady on the controls. We just need to get through. The ship bucked as another volley slammed into them, sending sparks flying across the cockpit. Vesk let out a choked gasp, his claws gripping the console in terror. We're not going to make it, he wailed. Yes, we are, Elias muttered through gritted teeth. With a final, desperate burst of speed, the Vanguard broke through the defensive barrage, its shields flaring brilliantly as it shot past the last of the turrets. The massive docking bays stretched out before them, a labyrinth of towering structures and gleaming warships. See, Elias said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Told you. Vesk just stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. You're insane, the scout whispered. Elias's smile widened. You're just figuring that out now? But the real challenge was still ahead. They had made it through the outer defenses, but the heart of the shipyard was a fortress unto itself. Every docking bay, every corridor would be crawling with Kreath soldiers and automated security drones. They would have to move quickly, strike hard, and hope that the chaos would buy them enough time. We're going to land in Base 7, Elias said, pointing to a cluster of smaller hangars near the central command tower. That's where they're building the warship cores. If we can plant charges in the power conduits, we can trigger a chain reaction that will tear this place apart. And then what? Vesk asked shakily. Then we get out, Elias replied calmly. Just like that? Vesk's voice was almost hysterical. There are thousands of soldiers here. We'll be torn apart. Elias turned to him, his expression hard. You wanted to fight back, right? You wanted to make a difference? He said quietly. Well, this is how we do it. Vesk stared at him, his eyes searching Elias's face. For a long moment he was silent. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he whispered. Okay, let's do this. The Vanguard swooped into the hangar bay, its landing gear clamping onto the deck with a resounding thud. Elias was already moving, his weapons at the ready as the boarding ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. The hangar was eerily quiet, the massive warship cores looming in the shadows like slumbering giants. Stay close, Elias murmured, glancing back at Vesk. The scout nodded, his claws trembling as he drew a small, sleek blaster from his belt. They moved quickly through the hangar, sticking to the shadows as they approached the main power conduits. The air was thick with the hum of energy, the conduits pulsing with a faint blue glow. Elias knelt beside the nearest one, his fingers flying over the controls as he set the charges. We need to hit at least 3 more conduits to trigger a full cascade, he whispered. Keep an eye out. But before they could move, a low, rumbling voice echoed through the hangar. Well, the human and his little pet. Elias froze, his blood turning to ice. He turned slowly, his gaze locking onto the massive figure emerging from the shadows, a Kreath commander. Its exoskeleton was larger and more heavily armored than any of the others Elias had faced, its carapace gleaming with intricate patterns that marked it as an elite warrior. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, filled with contemptuous amusement. I should have known you'd come here, the commander sneered, its mandibles clicking in a twisted grin. The last human. Throwing himself into the fire one last time, Elias rose to his feet, his plasma blades igniting with a low hum. I'm here to make sure your war ends today, he said softly. The commander laughed, a harsh grating sound. "You think you can stop us?" it hissed. "We are the Kreath. We are conquerors. And you are nothing." It lunged, moving with terrifying speed for a creature its size. Elias barely had time to react, his blades crossing in a defensive arc as the commander's claws slammed into it. The impact sent him staggering back, pain flaring in his arms as he struggled to keep his balance. "Elias!" Vesk cried, raising his blaster. "Stay back!" Elias shouted, dodging another swipe. The commander was relentless, its blows raining down with crushing force. Elias gritted his teeth, his muscles burning as he parried and struck, each movement a desperate attempt to stay one step ahead. "You are weak!" the commander snarled, its eyes blazing. "Your race was weak. That's why you were destroyed." Rage flared in Elias's chest, hot and searing. "And that's why you fear us," he shot back, his voice cold as steel. "Because even when we're broken, even when we're outnumbered, we never stop fighting." With a roar, he drove forward, his blades flashing in a blur of motion. The commander reeled back, surprise flickering in its eyes. Elias pressed the attack, his strikes coming faster, harder, each one fueled by the memory of his fallen people, of a world reduced to ash. The commander let out a furious bellow, swinging wildly, but Elias was already inside its guard, his blade slicing through the joints of its armor. With a final, savage twist, he drove his weapon into the creature's chest, piercing the thick carapace. The commander spasmed, its eyes wide with shock. "No!" it choked out, its voice a rasping whisper. "Impossible." "Not impossible," Elias murmured, his voice low. "Human." He twisted the blade, and the commander crumpled, its massive form collapsing to the ground in a heap of shattered armor and leaking ichor. Elias stepped back, breathing hard. The hangar was silent, the only sound the faint crackle of energy from the fallen commander's armor. Elias," Vesk whispered, his voice trembling. You did it." "Not yet," Elias said softly. He turned back to the power conduit, his hands moving swiftly as he set the final charges. The timer blinked to life, its numbers counting down in a steady rhythm. "Let's go," he said, grabbing Vesk's arm. "We have 5 minutes to get clear." They sprinted back toward the Vanguard, the hangar bay a blur of motion and shadows. The ship's engines roared to life as they leapt aboard, the boarding ramp ceiling shut behind them. "Hang on!" Elias shouted, slamming the throttle forward. The Vanguard shot out of the hangar like a bullet, streaking away from the shipyard just as the first explosion rocked the structure. Flames erupted from the docking bays, spreading rapidly as the chain reaction tore through the conduits. The warships moored in the surrounding bays began to shudder, their power cores destabilizing. And then, with a deafening roar, the entire shipyard detonated in a blinding flash of light. Elias watched the destruction from the cockpit, his expression grim. The Kreath fleet, an armada capable of bringing the galaxy to its knees, was gone. The war wasn't over, but they had struck a blow that the Kreath would never recover from. "They'll remember this day," he murmured soft. Beside him, Vesk nodded slowly, his eyes wide with awe. "Yeah," he whispered, "they will." Elias turned his gaze to the stars, his jaw set. "And when they do, they'll remember the name of the one species they couldn't break: human."